In 1831, a biologist prepared to set sail on a voyage, one that would ultimately change the course of human history. Despite having constant sickness, Charles Darwin spent almost 5 years sailing around the world aboard the HMS Beagle, where he studied the natural world and developed his theories. After the voyage, he played an active role in the scientific community and in 1859 published the book he is most well known for, On the Origin of Species. Darwin found that species of organisms changed over time, and that those more fit for their environment produced more offspring, thereby upgrading the population. He thought that this could bring about all the diversity of life that we find today. This idea was rapidly adopted by people in the scientific community, and since the time of Darwin, the theory of evolution has become widely supported. Welcome to the first episode of the Christianity on Fire Origins video series. I'm Lucas, and this content from these videos comes from my Origins book. In the book, as well as in this video series, we're going to talk about the origins debate, or the creation-evolution debate. We're going to look at it from a variety of perspectives and talk about science, how well the Bible agrees with each theory, and even how origins impacts ethics. Before we get started, however, we need to ask ourselves a very important question. Since science is all about empirical testing, should biblical creation be considered as a possible origins theory because it involves supernatural action? It may seem counterintuitive that a scientific theory could involve supernatural action. How could it be scientific if it breaks the laws of nature, which are what science is built upon? How could scientific evidence even be trusted since the laws of nature have been broken? It's true that during the creation week, the first event in the biblical creation theory, there is much supernatural action because God brings different elements of the universe into existence each day. And there are events that, though they likely operated under the normal laws of nature, would need to be taken into consideration as we do our science today. The main one being a massive flood that covered the earth, and an event where human languages were scrambled, followed by people spreading out around the world. However, for most of history, the natural laws would have worked just like today. So, in the biblical creation theory, like the evolution theory, we can trust the results of our scientific experiments. But what if there is something about how biblical creation requires supernatural action that makes it invalid? Imagine for a moment that you have some evidence for evolution and some for biblical creation. And in this imagined situation, suppose that the evidence for creation is much stronger than the evidence for evolution. Would you reject biblical creation just because there is supernatural action required somehow? You could, but then you will be shorthanding yourself by rejecting the theory that has more evidence for it. Why would you pick a second best option if the first option has some sort of surprising feature, but one that was unrelated to the evidence attributed to it? Hopefully, you would pick biblical creation due to the evidence, even if it lacked this always naturalistic property. Okay, so now we're going to begin our look at science and how it connects with origins. Our journey will begin by looking at how the process of evolution works. Inside of almost every cell of every biological living entity is a molecule called DNA. It's a strand of sugar molecules on the outside and molecules called amino acids on the inside, coiled up in a double helix, basically a sort of a spiral in 3D. The acids on the inside work like a code. They contain a blueprint or the program of how to create the organism for which they code. DNA is supposed to be the substrate on which evolution operates on. Over generations of the organisms, evolution will work on the DNA and change the creature for which it codes. There's only a few steps, in the process of evolution in a single generation. When an organism grows up, it may create offspring, and the DNA from the parent will be copied to the offspring. For creatures with two parents, there is an extra combination step of the blending of the parent DNA together. But even though the offspring have a copy of or a blend of the parent DNA, there might be differences. These are called mutations, and on the DNA level, they are called point mutations. Point mutations come from a variety of sources, but whatever the case, DNA in the offspring is changed and is different than the parent. The code for this offspring has changed, and when the offspring grows up and finds its way into the world, we will find out what that mutation will actually make a difference for in its survival chances. Depending on how good that organism's DNA is, it may get a chance to make more offspring, or it may die off ahead of its time. This is called natural selection. Nature has selected organisms over others and will create more offspring of their own. The ones that survive and produce the most offspring then create the next generation of organisms, and the process moves forward. Through this combination of mutation and natural selection, evolution can continue to upgrade the population, making them better and better. This process has been successfully applied to evolve populations and optimize them in their environments. There are many computer simulations showing how it can upgrade organisms, and this has inspired the academic area called evolutionary computing, where problems are solved by simulating evolution on a computer. For example, YouTuber and computer scientist Carrie K.H. made an evolution simulator that does a great job visualizing this process. It evolves a population containing of creatures of nodes, muscles, and neurons. Nodes contain a number. Some are constant while others change based on the neurons going into them. They also each have a degree of friction with the ground. The darker the color, the node, the higher the friction. Muscles are physical connections between the nodes and expand and contract based on the number of the nodes around them. Neurons carry numbers from one node as an input to another node. So, each creature is dropped into a two-dimensional world with physics and tested to see how far it travels to the right. A population of 1,000 creatures undergoes this test. They are sorted from top left to bottom right by how far they went. Then there's a selection process where the slower ones are killed with a degree of randomness so that some slower creatures survive while some faster ones don't. The last step is replacing the killed creatures with new ones made from the surviving faster creatures. This entire process makes up one generation. The creatures start out random, and most travel very little distance right or left. After a few generations, though, there is some progress, with the triangle design taking over the population of creatures. The node on the left pushes the creature forward, while the ones on the right slide along. However, after even more generations, a sort of wheel begins to emerge out of the population of creatures. It appears, instead of having a node on the right, the wheel assists on propelling the creature forward. This design is more efficient than the triangle, and the process of evolution has had a success in upgrading the population to find the optimal design. Pretty cool. So if the evolutionary process works so well, why would anyone not believe it? Well, creationists believe that the evolutionary process can work, but that the parameters in real life, biological evolution, aren't right to make it work. Let's look at some examples of this. Between the DNA, one generation to the next, there are point mutations. where one or very few nucleotides have been changed. The point mutations are the engine to be able to change the organism over time. Otherwise, all the DNA would come from its parents. The number of point mutations that happens every generation is very important. If there are too many at one time, it would overwhelm the genome, that is the entire DNA all across the entire DNA of the creature, like that's the entire program, and come out, the mutations would come out so fast that natural selection wouldn't be able to keep them out. Geneticist H.J. Mueller in 1950 suggested that if the average number of mutations every generation in the genome in humans, he suggested that it couldn't be higher than 0.5 mutations, or perhaps no higher than 0.1. The actual number of point mutations in humans is about 100 per generation. And you can see why this would be a problem for evolution. Let's say you have some DNA and you're trying to spell the word household. Right now, you need to change the first and last letters to make the desired word. If you have one mutation per generation, you could control the process through natural selection and